This is a true crime in real time update from True Crime Today and the Hidden Killers podcast.
I'm Tony Brueski, and today we're unraveling a story that feels like the plot of a movie, but it's real, and the stakes couldn't be higher. This case is about two brothers, Erik and Lyle Menendez, who shocked the nation in 1989 by gunning down their parents in cold blood. Or so we thought. Now, decades later, with new evidence on the table, the story is beginning to shift, and the question remains, were these brothers ruthless killers or desperate survivors of unimaginable abuse? The Menendez brothers, locked away for more than 30 years, might have another shot at freedom. The brothers admit to the crime, but with claims of long-buried trauma surfacing, the legal narrative is turning on its head. Erik Menendez's handwritten letter to his cousin, unearthed after years in the shadows, paints a grim picture of sexual abuse at the hands of their father. Added to this is testimony from a former member of the boy band Menudo, alleging that the same man, Jose Menendez, abused him too. If true, these details could rewrite the narrative of what happened in that Beverly Hills mansion in 1989. But here's the rub. Could these revelations change everything? The Los Angeles District Attorney is reconsidering the brothers' sentencing, and if the case is reevaluated as manslaughter rather than premeditated murder, Lyle and Erik could walk free by Thanksgiving. Think about that. A crime that once seemed so clear-cut now hinges on the question of abuse. Were the brothers trapped in a nightmare that no one saw? Or is this just a clever bid for freedom after years behind bars? And what about the lavish spending sprees they embarked on after their parents were killed? Was that the behavior of traumatized boys or greedy killers? The line between victim and villain has never been thinner. And that's the dilemma at the heart of this story. We'll explore how trauma shapes actions, whether the truth was silenced for decades, and what justice means when abuse is part of the equation. Were Erik and Lyle Menendez truly trying to survive? Or did they cross a line that can't be undone no matter the context? Now that you're caught up, we're about to dive deep into this twisted case, one that's been scrutinized for years but could be flipped on its head in the coming weeks. The Menendez brothers, Lyle and Erik, have become infamous symbols of family betrayal. In 1989, the two young men, aged 21 and 18, executed their parents, Jose and Kitty Menendez, inside their Beverly Hills mansion. The brutality of the murders shocked the nation. Shotguns were used at close range, and the crime scene painted a picture of unimaginable violence. At first glance, it seemed like the perfect blueprint for a classic true crime narrative: two privileged sons driven by greed, killing their parents to inherit millions. But the brothers' story is anything but simple. The prosecution at the original trial argued that Lyle and Erik wanted their parents' wealth and freedom. Just days after the murders, the brothers went on lavish shopping sprees, buying luxury watches, cars, and properties. To many, it seemed clear-cut, cold-blooded killers indulging in their newfound riches. Yet, as details emerged during the trial, a darker, more complex narrative began to unfold. The defense introduced the idea that these were not just spoiled children, but traumatized survivors of severe sexual abuse. According to the defense, Jose Menendez, a powerful entertainment executive, had molested both of his sons for years. Lyle testified that the abuse started when he was 6 years old and ended when he was 8. Erik, however, said the abuse never stopped. The brothers' claim was not simply that they killed for financial gain, but that they lived in fear. Fear that their father's abuse would continue, and perhaps worse, that their secret would get out. In their version, they acted not as murderers, but as trapped boys who believed the only way to escape was through violence. This argument was powerful and divided public opinion. But at their second trial, much of this evidence, critical testimony of abuse, was barred by the judge. Now, 30 years later, fresh evidence has come to light. The most explosive piece? A handwritten letter from Erik to his cousin, written months before the murders. In it, Erik confided that his father's abuse was ongoing, writing, "It's still happening, Andy, but it's worse for me now. I never know when it's going to happen, and it's driving me crazy." The letter, recently discovered by the cousin's mother, could fundamentally reshape the case. Even more troubling are new allegations from Roy Rosselló, a former member of the boy band Menudo. Rosselló claims that Jose Menendez sexually assaulted him as a teenager. He alleges that during a visit to the Menendez home, Jose drugged and raped him, eerily mirroring the brothers' accusations of their father's behavior. These revelations have sparked a reconsideration by Los Angeles District Attorney George Gascon, who is actively reviewing the case. Gascon's office is evaluating whether the brothers' original sentencing was just given the new evidence. If the abuse allegations had been heard in full during the trial, would the jury have reached the same verdict? And if the brothers were truly acting out of fear and trauma, could this case be reclassified as manslaughter rather than murder? This brings us to the crux of the legal debate. The California Resentencing Unit considers psychological trauma that wasn't taken into account at the original sentencing. If the abuse allegations are now deemed credible, the Menendez brothers could be eligible for release. Since 2021, the Resentencing Unit has reviewed hundreds of cases, with many resulting in early release. If the judge agrees to resentencing, Erik and Lyle Menendez could walk free by Thanksgiving, more than 3 decades after the night that changed their lives forever. But the question remains, how much can trauma justify? The line between self-defense and premeditated murder is razor thin. Were these two young men truly in a fight for survival, or were they calculating murderers masking their greed with claims of abuse? The timing of the letter written before the killings lends credibility to their defense. Yet, the brothers' behavior after the murders, blowing through their parents' fortune, raises doubt. Could these actions be the result of pent-up trauma, a desperate attempt to seize freedom, or simply greed unleashed? Family members have also come forward with mixed reactions. Some relatives now support the brothers, believing their story and arguing that they were failed by both their parents and the legal system. One aunt, Joan Vandermolen, recently told reporters they were just children brutalized in the most horrific of ways. But not everyone is so forgiving. Other relatives, like Kitty Menendez's brother, insist the brothers acted out of selfishness and should remain in prison for the rest of their lives. The public, too, is divided. The release of Netflix and Peacock documentaries has reignited debate over the brothers' fate. In an era more attuned to the nuances of trauma, some now argue that Erik and Lyle's actions were the result of years of unchecked abuse. Others maintain that murder, regardless of the motive, must carry consequences. The legal system will soon face one of its most complex challenges, balancing justice with compassion, punishment with understanding. If the judge rules that the brothers' trauma justifies a lesser sentence, what precedent will that set for future cases? And if they are released, how will society reckon with the fact that two men who brutally killed their parents are now free because of trauma that was invisible for decades? This is where the story stands, on a razor's edge. And as the judge prepares to make a decision, one question lingers. What is justice when survival demands the ultimate price? The Menendez brothers' path to possible freedom is paved with emotional twists that make this case as captivating as it is confounding. What makes this moment even more critical is how deeply it cuts into the heart of the justice system. What weight should new evidence carry after 3 decades? How do we weigh trauma, repressed memories, and family betrayal against the finality of murder? For their supporters, this is about more than just a legal technicality. Family members like Joan Vandermolen have argued that society's understanding of sexual violence and trauma has evolved. If the brothers were young men today, their defense might have played out differently, an argument that their actions stemmed from years of physical and emotional torture. This would frame the killings not as premeditated murder, but as acts born from desperation. But there's a darker undercurrent to this family saga that makes even the staunchest supporters pause. In the aftermath of the murders, Lyle and Erik didn't just vanish into grief. They went on extravagant spending sprees, splurging on everything from designer watches to luxury condos. To some, this behavior looks like the indulgence of 2 sons liberated from oppressive parents. To others, it reeks of greed, reinforcing the prosecution's argument that financial gain was the brothers' primary motive. The prosecution during the second trial, which ultimately led to their convictions, successfully barred much of the testimony about abuse. The judge ruled that the details of sexual abuse were irrelevant to the case's core question: did the brothers commit premeditated murder? With that decision, the jury was left with a binary choice: first-degree murder or not guilty. There was no room for understanding the nuance of trauma. Yet trauma, as experts now argue, can manifest in unexpected ways. Dr. Karen Franklin, a forensic psychologist not affiliated with the case, explains that survivors of long-term abuse can act out in destructive ways, sometimes even masking their pain with material excess or erratic behavior. Could Lyle and Erik's post-murder extravagance have been a way of reclaiming power after years of helplessness? Or does it reflect an entirely different narrative, one where abuse, if it occurred, was merely a convenient excuse for murder? And the question of motive becomes even murkier with the introduction of new testimony from Roy Rosselló, the former Menudo band member. If Jose Menendez, as Rosselló alleges, was capable of drugging and assaulting him, it casts a new shadow over the father's character. Could this piece of evidence, long buried, validate the brothers' claims of abuse? And if so, what does it say about a legal system that refused to hear these allegations in full at the time of the trial? The resentencing review, spearheaded by DA George Gascon, is not without controversy. On one side, legal experts argue that cases like these must be revisited through the lens of contemporary knowledge about trauma. Others fear that opening the door to resentencing in such high-profile cases could set a dangerous precedent. Could other convicted killers follow suit, claiming abuse that was not presented in their original trials? And how do we ensure that justice remains just even decades after the fact? Meanwhile, the victims' family members remain deeply divided. Kitty Menendez's brother, Milton Anderson, has publicly condemned the effort to resentence the brothers. In his statement, he called the murders vicious and emphasized that financial greed was the true motive. Anderson insists that releasing the brothers would undermine the justice that was so painstakingly achieved. And yet, at a recent press conference outside the Los Angeles courthouse, more than 24 family members stood united in calling for the brothers' release. Some wore pins that read, "Justice through healing," a reflection of their belief that Lyle and Erik are not the same men who pulled the triggers on that fateful night in 1989. Brian Anderson, one of the brothers' cousins, said, "If their trial were held today, their father's abuse would be front and center in their defense." The family's public plea underscores a significant shift in how society views the brothers today. Decades of good behavior in prison have painted a picture of two men who have changed, matured, and, in some ways, found redemption. They have mentored younger inmates, completed education programs, and avoided conflict. If rehabilitation is truly the goal of incarceration, supporters argue, then what more could be expected of them? The final decision now rests with the court. Gascon has indicated that the DA's office will present its recommendation by November 26th. If the judge agrees, the brothers could walk free before Thanksgiving, a possibility that has stirred both hope and outrage. But what happens if they are released? The brothers have spent more than half their lives behind bars. The world has changed dramatically since they were imprisoned. Would they be able to reintegrate into society? Could they find a way to live beyond the shadow of their past? And most importantly, how would they reconcile with the memories that have haunted them all these years? As the legal drama inches closer to a resolution, one thing is certain. This case is about far more than the events of one August night in 1989. It's about trauma, justice, and the blurred lines between victim and perpetrator. And as the public watches with bated breath, the final question looms larger than ever. What is justice for the Menendez brothers? The Menendez case, it's one of those stories that crawls under your skin, isn't it? I mean, on the surface, you have two wealthy, privileged young men who gunned down their parents in cold blood. Sounds like the perfect tabloid fodder, an open and shut case. Or at least that's what it looked like in 1989. But as with most things in life, the truth is never that simple. We've learned a lot about trauma since then. We now understand that trauma, especially childhood sexual abuse, doesn't just go away. It doesn't stay in a neat little compartment where you can close the door and lock it away. It festers. It transforms people, sometimes driving them to desperate acts, even violent ones. And if what Lyle and Erik say about their father is true, then what happened that night was a tragic explosion of years of repressed fear and pain. But here's the thing. Acknowledging that trauma doesn't absolve them of what they did. It's not a free pass to murder your parents, no matter how horrific the abuse might have been. Accountability and empathy have to coexist. Yes, it seems their father might have been a monster, but the question remains, was this about survival or was it about greed? That's what the courts will have to decide all over again. So here's where we leave things, for now. Will the judge agree that justice demands a second chance? Or will Lyle and Erik remain exactly where they've been for the past 3 decades, behind bars? I don't have the answer. But I can tell you this. Whatever happens, this case is far from over. I'm Tony Brueski. Press subscribe so you don't miss a single update on this case and every other story we're covering. Until next time, take care.
In a world where the darkest secrets lie just beneath the surface.
They said it was an accident, but the evidence says otherwise.
Where hidden killers roam, unnoticed, in the shadows.
I think you would definitely be looking at a blend of toxic, very bad narcissistic personality traits, and they will be vengeful and possibly resort to violence.
Join Tony Brueski as he uncovers the truth behind the most chilling cases.
They said it was an accident, but the evidence clearly says otherwise.
Each episode, we dig deep into the minds of those who commit the unthinkable.
To your point on narcissism, he thinks in his own mind how witty he is.
Yeah.
But he lost that jury. I was done with him in 2 minutes.
From unsolved mysteries to infamous crimes.
Geez, you've just talked about how you've taught yourself how to do everything under the sun. I bet you did a YouTube video, how to best kill somebody with a knife.
Hidden Killers with Tony Brueski takes you where few dare to go.
How does someone with such a dark secret go unnoticed for so long?
With multiple new episodes every single day.
We're not just telling stories, we're seeking justice.
Listen now on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for Hidden Killers with Tony Brueski.